Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our final charities webinar of 2024, which is on the subject of everything you want to know about AI, but we're afraid to ask. My name's Fiona Condren, and I'm BDO's National Head of Charities, which means I oversee both the delivery of external audit, but also an increasing range of advisory services, including digital and risk assurance. We know that AI is a really interesting and important topic for many people, and the charity sector is actually no different. Over the past month alone, I've picked up articles such as Bernardo's drawing on AI to show the power of childhood intervention. Also, Charity Finance magazine recently reported on a survey that was conducted by Blackboard, where 57% of charity professionals, and particularly fundraisers, were already using AI for drafting copy and social media content, but felt they still lacked the resources and carry concerns about data security, reputation, risk, and bias. There's also a range of really interesting articles on a number of platforms, including Charity Digital. So there's lots of sources of information. So that brings me nicely to today's session. I'm delighted that Dan Francis, a partner and BDO's Chief Innovation and Digital Officer, has kindly agreed to join me today to share his insights. The session is being recorded and will be shared with you in the next few days. So if you've missed anything or want to share the content with colleagues, there'll be a chance to catch up. The slides will also be available to download. At the end of the session, there'll be an opportunity for you to pose questions to Dan, so please do put them in the Q&A function during the course of the presentation. I also know that Dan's going to be hosting a couple of polls during his session, so please be ready to interact as we delve into the topic of AI. If there isn't time to answer all questions at the end of the session, then we will endeavour to respond to these after the event. We will be concluding no later than 10:30 today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Fiona. Good morning, all. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm Dan Francis. So I've worked in technology for quite a few years, and also across the charity sector. A lot of work I've been doing, particularly in finance and loyalty and retail, was actually with this sector. So particularly pleased to be able to speak to you today about AI. Next slide, please. So just to set the scene a little bit, kind of if we go really wide to kind of start with, you know, for a few hundred years, in fact, a few thousand years, I guess we have been innovating in different areas, and there's lots of waves of this kind of transformation that disrupts the whole world, and not just this particular sector. And we're really seeing now the kind of sixth wave, depending on how you kind of view these things and which reports you read. You've got a kind of automation, AI, robotics, digitization kind of piece really taking off, based off of the last wave, which is really around networking and sort of computer technology in the last sort of 30 to 40 years or so. So a huge amount of disruption and change, a huge amount of spend from some of the world's most powerful and well capitalized companies, and you all know these. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk to you about AI, and specifically really generative AI, because that is the area that is relatively new. AI has actually been around for sort of 50, 60, 70 years, depending on your kind of viewpoint. It's really been around for as long as technology and computers have been in existence. And anytime you've flown on a plane in the last 50 years with autopilot, or used Google Maps, for example, or Siri and so on, you're using AI. And when they're baked into our everyday tools and technologies, and our products and services that we use, we don't really think of AI as being new technology. But generative AI was discovered and invented really around 10 years ago. So Google DeepMind and a lot of other researchers in this area have looked at this particular type of technology, and now we're seeing in the last 3 to 4 years we're seeing this wave of products. So today I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through those. But first, I believe we've got a poll for you. If we can have the poll up, please. First one. So there's a couple of questions now, and then we'll come back to you at the end. and see basically your kind of readiness factors. So first poll is around the impact of AI on your particular charity. So if you can rate that one, please. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that, or a minute or so. Okay. We can have the results, please. So quite a mixed spread around that, but obviously quite a few people, and I have no idea, which is often the case at the moment. And I think we'll just go to the second poll, please. So this is just gauging your level of knowledge and confidence around AI. One choice, please. And if we can go to the results. Yeah. So obviously with new technology, particularly AI and things that have been probably in press for the last 2 to 3 years, probably the last 2 to 3 years, probably 2 years since Chat GPT hit the headlines, that is a very common response. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. Close the poll. So if I put up slides such as this, it's very, very likely, in fact expected, that you're not going to know what some of these terms are. You might well have used Chat GPT, and there are other models and products now available. Chat GPT is available to everyone pretty much for free. There is a paid version, there is an enterprise version. Google have Gemini, and Facebook and other products are around, and there's a kind of explosion of kind of third-party tools. But so those are the ones that you may be using, and people in your organization may be using as well. Around about 10, maybe 15% of typical organizations have users that are engaging with this type of technology. So it's not mass market at the moment, although it does get a lot of press. The underlying technology is generative AI. So that is a form of AI. There are other different types of AI. I would caution that you don't label everything as generative AI, because there are definitely different types and types of technology that have been around a while, and new types that are not generative AI. But generally speaking, generative AI is trained on huge amounts of data. In fact, it's the world's data. It's pretty much everything that is out there. So typically those are called foundational models. Those are things called, you'll hear words like GPT-4 from OpenAI. That's the underlying large language model. And this is trained on essentially the world's available information. So anything that exists freely available on the web, on the internet, whether that's Twitter, Reddit, your website, news websites, publications, is scraped en masse and used to train these models. GPT is effectively a pre-trained transformer model. I won't go into the technical detail behind it, but remember the pre-trained bit. So when you're using these large language models, or Chat GPT or Copilot from Microsoft, you're using something that's pre-trained, and largely that knowledge was fixed at a point in time. Now the newer models are able to kind of augment their pre-trained models by calling out to the internet and doing things and searching for things. So they're getting smarter. But just be aware that some of these models can effectively be a few months or a year or two out of date. Next slide, please. Now the world has moved on even in a couple of years. While the underlying models can take a year to train and £50 million worth of compute, actually the services and products that sit on top of them are really, really fast moving. In fact, even on a daily or weekly basis, we can see new features released into these products. So OpenAI is an independent company that produces Chat GPT. That's the well-known one. They actually license their technology to Microsoft and plenty of others. So you often see that technology embedded into things like Microsoft Copilot. And often we think of these as text tools, chatbots, Chat GPT, of course. But they have moved on. In fact, we've seen Chat GPT gain the ability to be able to both produce and understand images, video, and audio. So you can give it an image and ask it what's in the image, and then work on that. And of course, these are going what's called multimodal, which means they can convert between different types of input and output. So a common example is text to video, or text to image, or asking a particular model what is in a particular video or image, and asking it to describe it, and then working with that information. So very, very powerful technology. And if we go to the next slide, we'll give you some examples. This is a really powerful example of Google's technology in this area.
Okay, let's do some tests. Tell me when you see something that makes sound.
I see a speaker, which makes sound.
What is that part of the speaker called?
That is the tweeter. It produces high-frequency sounds.
Give me a creative alliteration about these.
Creative crayons color cheerfully. They certainly craft colorful creations.
What does that part of the code do?
This code defines encryption and decryption functions. It seems to use AES-CBC encryption to encode and decode data based on a key and an initialization vector, IV.
That's right. What neighborhood do you think I'm in?
This appears to be the King's Cross area of London. It is known for its railway station and transportation connections.
Do you remember where you saw my glasses?
Yes, I do. Your glasses were on the desk near a red apple.
What can I add here to make this system faster?
Adding a cache between the server and database could improve speed.
What does this remind you of?
Schrodinger's cat.
All right, give me a band name for this duo.
Golden Stripes.
Nice. Thanks, Gemini.
So I think you can see as a particularly powerful example of really quite complex tasks being carried out there. And that's a demo video, but you can try that product for real. You can go to Google and use it. We talk a little bit about kind of technology being used for good, but we have to remember that obviously any technology people take advantage of. So just a really good example here around deepfake technology. If you can play the video, please.
Second youngest son. He's suggesting it came out of nowhere. What we subsequently learned is it may have come from the former president or his legal team acting in bad faith. This is a deepfake example of what is possible with powerful computer and editing. It took around 72 hours to create this example from scratch using extremely powerful GPU. It could be improved with more computing time, but 90% of people cannot tell the difference.
I think you get the idea around that. But in a few seconds, you can create effectively clones of yourself now using, if you look at technology such as HeyGen and a few others around there. And the technology is getting so good now that you can effectively create, this type of image, have it speak in any language that you like, and do anything that you require. You're even able to effectively overlay your image or somebody else's image and voice on top of a real-time Teams or Zoom call now. So that technology doesn't exist. So I think from a security perspective, always be aware that if you receive phone calls and video calls, whether it's interviews or instructions or transferring money or whatever, always verify who that person really is. There's quite a lot of good examples around fraud in this area, although it doesn't happen very often. Next slide, please. So I guess the point of showing you that, and these examples really kind of bring it to life. These are real products that are being used out there, real examples that are happening in the world, and that can be happening in your sector too. But the point is, around some of these examples, they are really helping people do more quickly. So really creating text or video or images, or helping people understand those text or images. So they are sort of assisting people. But we're really seeing a new rise of types of AI. So if that is either worrying you or inspiring you, there is a whole new wave of what we call agentic AI. These are AI agents, so typically multiple agents that work together to complete tasks. So if you can just build the slide for me, please, Jamie. And you are seeing effectively moving from creating to doing. So just the final build, please, Jamie. This is where we're starting to replace whole tasks, whether they're quite sort of simplistic tasks, such as, for example, writing a response to a bid, or creating content, or creating, in fact, even a website or an application. Now, this is relatively early days. Agentic AI or AI agents are really more at the concept stage and are being rolled out now in some places. We're seeing, for example, I think Airbnb and Klarna and a few others that are investing in this type of technology, particularly for customer service. And this will be transformative for most industries, most sectors over the next 5 to 10 years or so. So we'll see probably the rest of the decade, this agentic AI or AI agents start to replace the doing rather than just the creating part of people's tasks. And what becomes software also can become physical. So we're actually seeing robots, a new class of really low-cost robotics, now able to do some fairly complex tasks, such as folding clothes and assembling and sorting things in factories. Things that really that proved very difficult for narrow focus robots to do can now be replaced by more general tasks. So that agentic AI or agent AI technology that you saw in the Google video is effectively powering a new class of robotics. So over the next 5 to 10 years, not tomorrow, not next year, you'll start to see these new forms of technology alongside of these existing ones. And of course, underpinning all of that needs to be responsible AI and the responsible use of technology and the right governance in an organization or in an industry around that. Next slide, please. So I won't major on this slide too much. This was, I think it was a slide from probably about 6 months or so ago. This looks at really how technology really, but AI in particular, and now generative AI, is able to take over whole classes of tasks. So for example, we don't do weather prediction really with humans anymore, although humans are in the loop and surround those and create those models. But the actual prediction itself is done by complex computers, and all the way through to things like driving a car, and even things like creating software and so on can be largely augmented by the existence of AI, normally products and services. But there are still some areas that, of course, technology finds it very, very difficult to do. Such anything that's more physical, that requires lots of human interaction, particularly in the service industry, and we've got personal care and therapy here. And of course, anything that to do with reasoning, judgment, and decisioning is still very difficult for AI to take over a huge part or all of. Next, please. So again, one of your responsibilities will be around, looking at the organization and how it can adopt new technologies. And responsible AI is a word that is often used. And making sure that if you're working with generative AI, whether that's buying products or building services in your organization, or in the way you're doing business, is that you have some level of responsibility around how it's being used, and a model to be able to control and govern that. And responsible AI frameworks are starting to emerge now as to be fairly easy things to be able to understand and implement, because they're grounded on things that we know and understand. There's no one right framework, but you can go to the government website. You can go to Microsoft, have a great responsible AI site. I think the ICO and others all have advice and a wealth of material around how you can stand up your own responsible AI framework and governance. And typically, these are the kind of the four areas that you would look at, particularly around transparency. Bias is a huge area, particularly if generative AI is using data, or your AI systems or products are using huge amounts of data. You will have bias in that data. Some is known, some is unknown. Some you can do something about, and some you can't. So understanding that is a really, really important part of this type of framework, including also the privacy and security. If you're working with large amounts of your own data, then you need to obviously ensure that is secure and treated with the right controls. Next slide, please. And I think you need to understand if you have a corporate risk profile, or a risk framework, or at board level, or whatever level you're working at. You need to understand whether introducing generative AI or new technologies is amplifying existing risks or creating new risks. And some examples are on here, from the very small sort of intended ones around, it might be that your competitors start to eat away at this, or your business model is disrupted, or there's something that generative AI has a more negative effect on your organization, all the way through to some of the more wacky things. But the high impact, maybe the sort of the piece around AI taking over the world and the structural effects and so on, are all things that a lot of people are worrying about, and we will need to as an industry, but also as a race, get our heads around. Just as we regulated the use of, for example, nuclear technology, weapons, and other areas, we'll probably see some level of regulation around a global regulation around AI. Next slide, please. So just to kind of close us out before we get into the final poll and questions, I'll just run through some kind of points, some kind of more practical aspects for you, because we talked a lot about, I've talked in general about lots of concepts and some examples and so on, but often I'm asked, and we saw from the earlier polls, is what do we actually need to do as an organization, and as an individual, what can I do? Well, I think one thing to understand is that if you have, as an organization, have policies, whether those are formal policies or frameworks or guidance, then do ask the question whether you need a specific AI policy, or whether your existing policies, so that might be acceptable use policy for your staff or for your customers, or whatever that might be, are fit for purpose when it comes to generative AI. And really have a look at all of your internal documentation and governance and policy and frameworks around this, and ask the question whether it needs to change because of the impact of generative AI. Make sure that your existing governance model is fit for purpose. It kind of is linked with the first point, but also make sure the teams that are operating these, so that might be your risk and governance teams or compliance teams or whatever it might be in your organization, have the skills that they're able to look at these things. Don't just assume that they can read something on generative AI and understand how that will impact. To take guidance from organizations, take advice, but also make sure your teams have the right skills all the way up to board and non-exec and other levels. You can also have a look at, so similar to 27001, ISO 42001 is an AI management system. So if you're familiar with those frameworks, then you can start to have a look at whether you would consider that in your organization. We talked a little bit about kind of updating the board and your overall organizational risks, but also consider the secondary effects and sort of the amplification of risk around generative AI. Organizations are really quick normally to identify risks to them and controls and mitigations around disruptive technology such as AI, but often the secondary effects is what kills organizations and sectors. The things that you didn't realize that would come to play out maybe 5 or 10 years down the road. So really try and have a think about those wider pieces and identify those up front and try and get ahead of them. A really important thing for you is around data and data privacy, data protection. Remember, large language models are trained on publicly available information. If you are publishing material on your website, whether that's high-level material or guidance or lots of documentation that is available to publicly consume, it will be going into large language models such as Chat GPT from OpenAI, and they will use that without your consent and bypassing any terms of use or privacy policies or whatever. They will rip that information off the website or from publicly available forums such as Reddit, Twitter, and other places. So do consider whether you should opt out of training or whether that material is sensible to be available or not. And also think about, there are a lot of areas around ethics and ethical AI, but particularly also around legal and copyright. So consider, for example, if you are building systems or products, whether you have the right to use that training data, whether it's ethical to use that data for that product, bearing in mind that just because you have a legal right to use data, maybe you've obtained consent, doesn't mean you have an ethical right to use data. And also start to pay attention to the legislation that's coming through. If you're operating in the EU, then you'll already be subject to the EU AI Act, is now law. And the UK is bringing in, or is due to bring in a similar one, and I think is consulting on that at the moment. Also have a look at your HR, so your people in your organization, whether you need different guidelines, different training, whether your contracts and job descriptions need to change on the basis of them either using generative AI products or not using generative AI products. For example, some organizations do not allow access to things like Chat GPT because the information that goes into those, such as uploading documents when you're working on them, will disappear into OpenAI's servers in the United States or elsewhere. And of course, products is a big area, or services interchangeably. So these are things where you're going to need to consider the impact on your products and services. Even if they're not technology based, there will probably be an impact over the next few years. And the final slide, please. So I think we'll make sure, obviously, you've got copies of these, but there are a couple of links here. If you really want to understand how I guess large language models and Chat GPT work, then there's a kind of visual explanation from the FT, and I would encourage you to have a look at that. It doesn't take too long, and that will give you a kind of idea as to how that would work and how that source works. And also, it really pulls apart what it can do and what it can't do. These models are generally predictive, and predictions can be wrong. If you have access to The Economist, sometimes this has been behind a paywall, There's some great coverage from The Economist and actually some other mechanisms. If you do one thing off the back of this presentation, then have a look at benevans.com. He has a weekly newsletter which you can subscribe to for free, which gives you pretty much the things you need to know about technology. It's the one thing I read every single week without fail. So that is the one that I would do if you do nothing else. And that is not just about AI, that's around technology. And there is some links here to the AI governance and ethics framework policy. So there are quite a few resources on that page and elsewhere around this. So I think we're about time. I think we have time for one more poll. Jamie, if you can put up to the poll, and then I will pass over to Fiona in a second when we've completed that. So in terms of AI readiness, do you think you have a good handle on the risks and opportunities? Please vote. And if you can bring up the answer, please. Okay. That's probably about right. Yeah. Okay, we'll close that poll and we are open for questions. Fiona, I'll hand over to you for your closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, there's still plenty of time for people to put their questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen there. But just to kick things off, Dan, I thought that was, obviously really fascinating to get your insights. But from the perspective of a charity, what's the most important piece of advice you would give somebody at this stage? I think given the fact that there seems to be a kind of hesitancy around this particular topic.
Yeah, I think definitely. It depends what level you're operating, but I think it's not somebody else's responsibility. So generative AI generally has a business and business impact. While it's a technology, a lot of people, when you're having a conversation, typically, if it's a board level or organizational management level, we'll look at the IT director or CIO and go, well, Gen AI, Chat GPT, that's the IT person's responsibility, isn't it? And yes, there will be some level of technology responsibility, but really it's everybody's responsibility around that table. Whether you're in HR, whether you're in business development, whether you're in finance function, you will need to understand and get your head around this technology. And so take the advice and take the help that you need. You're not expected just to know about this. We've had previous waves of technology that have come along, such as cloud, mobile, and so on. Everybody needs help to understand this technology and then integrate that into your everyday role.
Yeah, and I suspect a lot of people on the call today are those people who are working directly involved in the activities of the charity, but we must also remember that they need to take their trustee board on this journey with them. And they're often people who are volunteers themselves and maybe got completely different backgrounds. So there's certainly a kind of journey that they all need to go on in terms of looking at the risks and opportunities and then taking their board with them on the journey as well. So that's it's really interesting. A few questions are coming through now in terms of, are there mechanisms available to opt website information out of AI training? I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question myself, but I'm going to hand that over to you.
Yeah, no problem. I think I understand. So most websites are indexed automatically by the web, by anybody that wants to go and read them. So a lot of traffic you get on a website. So if your charity has a website with a large amount of content on it, it will be regularly accessed by what are called robots. They are basically downloading every single part of your website to put into Google, to put into searches for whatever reason. The same is true for large language models. They basically scrape the internet of everything. In fact, somewhat strangely, you can download the internet from the internet. So something called the Common Crawl, which you can Google, commoncrawl.org, I think it is, which is basically a a subset of the internet. So most of the internet is actually not really that useful. It's a lot of material that is up there, but if you distill it down to the core text, such as stuff on BBC News or stuff on your website, if you go to BDO's website and it's got some stuff around BDO, or if you go to boards such as Mumsnet or Reddit or whatever it might be, where they've got large amounts of original content, then those are typically scraped into files called the Common Crawl, and you can download that, and that's what large language models are trained on. You'll probably find your own content within that file. So the question is, how can you opt out? Well, there's something called a robots.txt file on every website. Most search engines and most large language model scrapers will observe that if you want to opt out of search and training material. Now, if you opt out search at your peril, because you won't appear on Google or any other search agents, but generally speaking, by opting out of that, you're able to take your data out of the training models. I would say probably a lot of people don't observe those at the moment when it comes to training data, though. So if it's publicly available, whatever disclaimer you put on it, it's probably being used and probably has been used, and there's very little recourse that you can have around that.
Great, thank you. So next question is, core costs can be a real challenge for charities. How can AI impact those costs? So I suppose there's a kind of almost like an underlying theme there that anything new and innovative is expensive. So can charities keep up with other corporates in terms of cost? But also, I suppose, the impact of AI could be to reduce costs if we're replacing some activities with, that might have needed people to do with, automated processes.
Yeah, I mean, there's the option. The technology is getting increasingly cheap now, so you can consume large language models, as a service. So you might be building this into your call center technology, or it might be available from your call center provider increasingly at a reasonably low cost. We operate some of this technology at BDO, and it costs us, a cent per use, as or even fractions of that. So generally speaking, the technology is relatively cheap to access. Products and services that are built on top of it that you may buy using that technology may be more expensive, though. So you may need to choose between buying or building. But yes, there are absolutely technology that can help call centers. You're seeing a huge influx now of really good chatbots as opposed to the really poor chatbots. We've all been on the situation where it says after this tone, please say what you want, and it simply doesn't understand or gets confused. Same is true for text-based chatbots on websites or whatever. They are now becoming to the point where they are at least as good as some call centers in terms of the basic ability. So do have a look at what is available in the marketplace. Don't settle for something that's very, very expensive, because generally speaking, this technology is becoming incredibly cheap very, very quickly. Most large language models are available either for free, and their services can be consumed inside your products and services for very little amounts of money.
Great, thank you. And what are the quick wins? So somebody's asked, is bank transaction automation an easy one to start with, or what are there other kind of ideas of kind of quick wins?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that involves things like bank transactions and things like that obviously needs a degree of consideration around how they're done. I think the big wins is really around content creation. So if you are creating, for example, materials or marketing materials, or anything where you have a high degree of source material yourself, either for websites, for social media, for brochures, for flyers, for PowerPoint slides or whatever, these can now be started quite quickly using generative AI. So if you're using, for example, Copilot in Microsoft Office, then you can create PowerPoints from your corporate template or your charity template. You can use things like meeting summarization and transcripts very, very easily. These are things you can just turn on. They're just feature sets in existing products. Obviously, you have to pay something for them, but generally speaking, there are price points that are available. You will also be able to look at whether you can obtain discounts. I know Microsoft have sort of turned down a little bit what they're doing in the sector and the availability, but generally speaking, you might be able to get some level of concessions around using this technology, or at least trialing this technology. And so I encourage you to trial it and work out what it's good for and what it's not so good for.
Great, thank you. And from an accountability perspective, which executive functions should own the accountability for driving AI and implementing it within an organization? And how do you avoid it being kind of dispersed in an unhelpful way?
That's a great question. Really, what it goes back to what I was saying earlier is that AI is really if you like, it's a field of technology. And when we talk about AI in an organization, we're probably talking about either building or buying products or services that use AI, particularly generative AI in this case. So that will go through your existing management and corporate structure. So ultimately, your board or your trustee or whatever organizational form you take will still be responsible for that. There won't be somebody new or something different because this is AI. If it's an HR matter, if it's an HR system that's using AI, it'll be your HR person. If it's a sales piece or if it's a finance function using AI in the accounting software, for example, or transaction, then it will be the finance, or the CFO or the finance director. So I think this is where I encourage you not to look at somebody else. If you're responsible for your function, you're responsible for your function, and AI will probably already be used somewhere in it. And generative AI, so the newer forms, will probably be coming in some of the products and services that you're buying, and maybe some of the things that you're building.
Great, thank you. And do you think the introduction of AI could potentially impact on membership organizations?
That's probably hard to say about maybe the context behind what those organizations are.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I saw the question, Dan, because I think membership organizations that are registered charities they often have multiple types of income from their members, but the core subscription can offer a range of different services. And what I've seen in the sector is that particularly where a membership is discretionary, so where you don't have to have that membership in order to be able to practice your profession, for example, then you are effectively drawing on somebody to say, well, there's a reason to continue with my membership. And the more you tailor the activities that you talk to that individual about, the more likely they are to create that, what I call stickability. So I sort of see that as a way, like any other customer, the way in which you can create information or articles or things which are responding to the particular interest areas of a member, then I think that is a kind of like a necessary way of keeping that momentum to renew your membership, if you like. The members are like customers, really.
Yeah, and I think generative AI in particular allows for fantastic advances in personalization. So you really can. I mean, the whole point of generative AI is that every single output is completely unique, and it's based on billions and billions of data. But you really have effectively the world's knowledge available on tap to be able to produce output. That's what the large language models are. It's everything that's ever existed on the internet has been trained, filtered, put into these models. So you have millions of people's intellectual property, somewhat controversially, available to you instantly to be able to hyper personalize your product, your service, your content to that particular member.
Yeah.
Now, how you do that and how you execute against that in your particular charity is kind of up to you. Whether you buy or build or then these are the opportunities that are available, and the cost doesn't have to be horrendous. As I say, some of these models are available for free. You can download, for example, Facebook's Claude and other models which are on par with OpenAI are available completely free of charge. They're open source. So you can use them yourselves at no cost whatsoever. You have access to really some of the most advanced technology on the planet, absolutely free of charge. OpenAI's APIs, if you consume their services in your products, such as we do at BDO, are available, relatively cheaply. We spend, a few £1,000s consuming their services for some of our internal products. Our own internal AI system is built on OpenAI's Chat GPT service, and that costs us relatively small amounts. I think we spend more on coffee in our office than we do on the services from OpenAI, and from Microsoft, and they are only getting cheaper as well.
Yeah. And the final question, which I suspect is a tongue-in-cheek question, is: should I ask AI to write my AI usage policy?
It's pretty good at doing it. Yeah, I think it's, again, you have every AI usage policy that Chat GPT or whatever has been trained on in there. So why not? Why not start from that version rather than start from a completely blank sheet of paper, or go to an organization and say, write me one. Use your knowledge of the organization and tailor one that the AI gives you. I would really have a look at what prompts you use. So the prompt is just instruction. But there are some really good examples that if you go onto YouTube around prompt engineering, which basically means writing better prompts. So if, for example, you give the prompt saying, acting as a data protection officer or acting as a chief risk officer, please write me a AI usage policy for the following sector. If you give it really precise instructions, and you can go into very, very extensive length on these prompts. We have prompts actually at BDO that are several pages of A4 that have been through thousands of iterations. The better your prompt, the better the output.
Right. Okay. And just before I wrap up, I was just going to mention that some of our colleagues in our digital risk assurance team are currently finalising a tool which is based on a survey to assess organisations' maturity for dealing with AI changes. It's almost ready to launch, but they're actually looking for some pilot organisations to trial the survey on free of charge. So if you're one of those organisations that have sort of started on this journey but need a bit of help and support, then please do reach out to me following this session, and I can put you in touch with them to see if they can help and support. But I think at that point we will bring this session to a close. So thank you so much, Dan, for giving us your time and your expertise. Sorry if you've posed a question and we've not been able to respond at the moment, but we will be able to summarise some of those questions later on. As I mentioned at the beginning, the session has been recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel in due course. And if you've registered for the event today, then you'll receive a copy of the slides as well. When you close the event today, there will be a survey for you to complete. It's very, very brief, but it just highlights that if you've got any follow-up questions, then you know who to reach out to. I said at the beginning, this is the last webinar for 2024, and I can hardly believe that we have got to that point already. But our next webinar will be on the 15th of January. Jamie, if you can just move forward the slide, actually, there's details of the next event that we are running. So in early January, we've always traditionally done quite a big technical roundup session. And if you register today, you'll automatically receive an invite for that. We also anticipate that we'll be running more detailed sessions looking at the implementation aspects of FRS 102 and the new charity SORP once the exposure draft has been published. We're expecting the exposure draft in early February next year, so it won't be available for our session in January, but because we already have FRS 102 out, we will be able to talk people through, again, preparedness that you need to bring into your planning for things like leases and income. So it's a really important topic, and I definitely encourage you and your teams to join us on that journey to transition to the new standards. And we also have our Fraud Awareness Week coming up. BDO is in the process of finalising our survey and report that we conduct in conjunction with the Fraud Advisory Panel. So look out for that. Again, another really important topic for the sector. But I think on that front, I will now leave you to finish your day or go into the rest of your day, and wish you all the best and have a lovely weekend. And thank you so much again for joining us.